Today we're going to talk about what happens when a super simple request for some documents blows up into a full-on legal battle. I mean, we're talking about a homeowner, his HOA, a single computer disk, and a forgotten password that somehow, someway ended up in front of a judge. Okay, let's get into it.
You ever ask for some records or information and just hit a total wall? Feel like you're getting the complete runaround? Well, that is exactly what happened to a homeowner down in Arizona. But here's the thing. He didn't just get mad. Nope. He took it to court, turning what was a neighborhood tiff into an actual legal case.
All right, so let's meet our players. On one side, you've got a homeowner, a guy named Horace E. Coon. And on the other, his HOA, the Indian Hills Airpark Association. And this whole thing kicked off like so many of these disputes do with one single letter.
So back on May 29, 2008, Mr. Coon does something that, is totally within his rights as a member of an HOA. He sends a formal written request asking to see the association's financial records. Sounds simple enough, right? Famous last words. Because yeah, this is exactly where things start to go sideways.
So the HOA decides, hey, let's be modern about this. They're going to fulfill the request using technology. But, and this is a big but, a tiny little bit of human error, we're talking a computer disk and a password, well, it turned this simple exchange into a real, genuine mess.
Okay, so here's how it went down. About 2 weeks after the initial request, the HOA treasurer pops a computer disk in the mail with all the records. Easy peasy. Except Mr. Coon gets it and he can't open it. Turns out the treasurer, who by this point is all the way out in Oregon, realized, oops, I used my personal password. So to fix the mistake, he makes a whole new disk, slaps a new generic password on it, and sends that one out.
So problem solved, right? We're all good now? Not so fast. Mr. Coon gets the second disk, and yeah, he can get into it this time, but he claims he still can't find or access all the data he wanted. So for him, this thing is far from over. He feels like the HOA just hasn't held up its end of the bargain.
At this point, Mr. Coon is, understandably, pretty frustrated with the whole back and forth, so he decides to take it up a notch. He files a formal petition with the state agency in Arizona that handles these kinds of HOA disputes. And just like that, this goes from being a neighborhood disagreement to an official legal case.
And in that official petition, you can really hear his frustration. He wrote that the HOA failed to provide requested financial/account records and had ignored repeated requests. I mean, he's basically saying, I asked, and they're just blowing me off. This really shows you how serious he thought this was.
And so the whole conflict, all of this back and forth, it really boils down to one simple question. On one side, you have Mr. Coon saying, hey, I'm entitled to paper copies of these documents. But on the other side, the HOA is saying, whoa, hold on. Giving you a computer disk in electronic format is totally fine. And that right there, that was the core issue the judge had to figure out.
So the case lands on the desk of an administrative law judge. He has to sift through all the evidence, look at the HOA's own rules, and check it against Arizona state law to finally decide who's right and who's wrong here. In the judge's final decision, he laid out a whole bunch of findings, but really the entire case, everything, hinged on just one of them. Finding of fact number 12.
And that finding was a slam dunk. The judge's verdict was crystal clear. He wrote that Mr. Coon's belief that he was entitled to paper copies is not supported by the evidence or applicable statutes. In other words, the judge said the HOA did nothing wrong by providing a disk. It was totally fine.
And the legal reasoning behind it was pretty straightforward. The bottom line is, according to Arizona law, giving someone an electronic record is a perfectly valid way to hand over documents. The law never says it has to be on paper. So as far as the law was concerned, the HOA had done its job.
Okay, but what about the money? Who pays for all this? Well, the judge said since Mr. Coon didn't win, he wasn't getting his filing fee back. That's on him. But the HOA didn't get a total win here either. They wanted Mr. Coon to pay for their lawyers, and the judge said no. Why? Because this was an administrative hearing, not what the law calls a court action, which is where you can usually get attorney's fees.
Look, this whole thing isn't just a quirky story about one guy and a password-protected disk. This case actually has some really important lessons for literally anyone who lives in an HOA or serves on an HOA board. So let's break down what we can all learn from this.
So what are the big takeaways here? Well, first off, electronic records are totally legit. If you ask for documents, don't be surprised if you get a digital file instead of a stack of paper. Second, if you take your HOA to court and lose, you're probably going to eat that filing fee yourself. But here's the kicker. Even if the HOA wins, they might not get their lawyers' fees paid for in these kinds of hearings. And maybe the most important lesson of all, this whole thing is a perfect example of how fast a seemingly simple request can spiral into a really expensive and time-consuming legal mess for everyone involved.
And all of this leaves us with one big question to chew on. Remember, this case was decided way back in 2008. A computer disk. I mean, today we're talking about the cloud, Google Drive, instant downloads, everything is digital. So as technology just keeps racing forward, that basic idea of what it means to have access to information, it's going to be tested over and over again. In our world of digital everything, what does access really truly mean?